So welcome to our very final virtual sanctuary event, Thriving Through Midlife. And today we're going to be looking at death and grief as our great teachers. So beforehand, I'm just going to talk about midlife in general. So did you know that women's ambition increases after the age of 55 before peaking at 65? While many of us fear aging as a time in our lives when we will become invisible, it can actually be a vibrant and empowering moment to finally learn to embrace who we are and push ahead with our goals. In fact, the Harvard Business Review recently found that, contrary to popular belief, many women reach their peak in the second stage of their careers. Happily accepting the process with aging in this way can have a huge psychological benefit on both our work and personal lives. The concept of positive aging encourages us to celebrate each moment of our life as we get to live. If, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that getting older truly is a privilege. Okay, so on death and dying and grief, we are taught to fear death. Some believe that talking about death will bring it forward or that it is morbid to do so. However, research shows that the more we accept and embrace the inevitability of death, the more fully we live our lives. And midlife is often referred to as the youth of old age. And for many, it can be when we face death for the first time. The death of our parents, our partners, our friends, our pets, and for some, our children. These experiences can wake us up to the fact that life is precious and finite. In this profound conversation, three women who are death walkers or death doulas share this personal and professional experience through the final stages of a woman's life. I'd like to introduce our three speakers. Beautiful Juji Sobosle, Maureen Filbert, and Jackie Bailey. So Garisha is going to share their bio in the chat, but I'm going to jump straight in. So to get us started, our first question is, so I'm going to send this one to you, Juji. Can you share your journey into working in the dying, with the dying and death?
Thank you so much, Faith, and hello everyone. It's just so beautiful to be in a room with such amazing women. And hello to everyone I know, and a kiss to all of you if I don't. And I want to acknowledge that I'm on Yuin country in the south coast of New South Wales, and if I'm lucky, I might have a little echidna come walk past the window and chat with me while we're going through this Zoom. So I pay my respects to the wisdom holders who've and the land itself, which is the great wisdom holder here. So my practice is as a healer, an artist, and a bodywork therapist. So I have about 30 years experience with that. And I want to tell three very short stories about my coming to a place of being a death doula and a death celebrant. The first little story is of being quite young and being in Beechworth, which is just across the border in Victoria, an old country town, and seeing this massive tree by the ruins of the hospital. And the tree itself seemed to have a canker in its trunk that was almost overwhelming the size of the trunk. However, the tree was still 140 feet tall, and it was so robust, and it was still punching the air with its energy and robustness, even with its age, and even with what seemed to be this notion, this understanding that it was dying. And I remember absorbing this knowledge, this cellular knowledge from the tree itself, and thinking, gosh, what a communication, and what a joy to sit with that something can be dying and living at the same time. The second little story would be of my experience of being out in Menindee Lakes on a project which included some Indigenous elders and community, and some white fellas who really knew how to muck up. They mucked up really badly. Apparently that's quite common in these combined processes. So we were going out to a workshop, and there was a lot of conflict in the group. And I remember Auntie Isabel just sitting back in her chair and watching and nodding her head. So she was already 80 and had diabetes, and she just watched this commotion as if it was something that's going to pass because something else supersedes all of this. And we stopped in a car because a kangaroo had just been killed just previously. And there were some young children with us as well, including my daughters, who at the time were only 4 and 8, and then some other children and a lot of women who were the workshop leaders. And the kangaroo was still warm, but it was clearly, it had passed. It was dying. It had stepped over into the place of death. And I just asked the group if it was okay to do a little ceremony around it. And I just had an intuition that it was asking for that. And in saying a prayer to the kangaroo and to the land in which it had lived its life, we all observed, including the children, that the heart of the kangaroo leapt from its body and returned from whence it had come. So it returned to the landscape, to the horizon. And it was an extraordinary moment and it was all in quiet. And I checked with the children whether they had seen that as well, and they nodded that they had. It was this beautiful experience that taught me, or answered some question about where do we come from and where do we go to? And therefore, what is the meaning of our lives and the span of our lives as we know it and understand it? And the heart, this is something that informs my practice with every client I work with. I sit in the space of the heart relationship, and it's something that potentially can give a lot of comfort to people, but it's also part of the mystery of life. Where do we come from and where do we go to? And seeing the kangaroo's heart go back from whence it had come was just an extraordinary experience, and full of wonder. The third part of the story goes back to my childhood, where I witnessed my father's death when I was 11 and he was only 62. So he was dying of cancer, and he was dying at home for 3 years. I was not allowed to know that he was dying. So every day I would go to school, come back, go to school, come back, and nothing was wrong, nothing was happening, nobody was sick. This was part of the Middle European culture into which I was born, that there was a protection of ego and pride, and of the value of life was clearly defined in a particular way. And I guess my father was home sick in bed for 3 months in that last stage of the 3 years of his life. And he went into a coma. He never asked to speak to us. He never called us into the room, which again was a cultural thing. And it was partly my mother's practice as well of denial. And I do remember that there was one night one night around dusk, and my mother just came into my room where I was studying, doing homework. And she said, Georgie, your father's gone into a coma. Do you think you can try and come and wake him up? And I went into the room, and I've written poetry about this, and perhaps, snippets of plays and things, but just remembering that moment was of absolute powerlessness, coloured with guilt as well, because of course I didn't wake him up. I couldn't. He was dying. This was death, and it wasn't my task. Not only not my task as an 11-year-old girl, but also not my task to do that anyway. And it was something that shaped my life in ways that I've understood it at various times over various decades. But most recently, in April this year, I did death doula training with Zenith Virago, who's an extraordinary and very gifted teacher, has been working for about 30 years in this area as a death doula. And she said on the first day, she said, death is death. She doesn't consider herself a healer. She considers herself a death walker. So she had no confusion about her role. But it took me 3 days to understand and let that seep in, that death is death. This is a passage that is inevitable. And in that moment when she's called into that role, this is the task. And on the third day, finally, I experienced a recognition of the grief around my father's death and the sense of guilt that I could do nothing about his death. And I was released from it almost like a bird from a cage. So I have felt growing in myself this dedication to death doula work since, I've probably been on that path for a very long time. 3 years ago, I was asked to MC a friend's funeral, and it was a 5-hour cabaret, really. It was a lot of fun and a lot of energy to hold, because they were kind of really wild people. It was really amazing, and I felt like I'd come home. But up until April this year, I had no idea what that final passage was for me to accept that death is death. and that accompanying people across that line is a specific task. And in fact, yeah, being real and true to that. So that's my story about how I find myself here. And there have been lots of other experiences with friends and relatives and accompanying people through their journey with their parents and even their children, and with people working with people with chronic illness that is shortening their lives. And with my own mother's death, where I had to have long conversations with her over 3 years about her passage over. So thank you, Faith, and thank you, everyone. That's my story.
Thank you, Gigi. Let's go straight over to Maureen. So the same question to you. So can you share your journey into working in this area?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Maureen Filbert. I met Faith at a friend's 50th earlier on this year and was warmly welcomed into the community. So I thank her for that. I'd also like to acknowledge the land on which I'm able to work and live and love, Gadigal land, part of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My journey into death came about almost by accident. I had been a chef for 30 years and decided that at age 50, I was standing up in kitchens, went to work for a friend of mine where I met a lovely lady who came to buy some lamps for her bedside table. And long story short, she ended up seeing what I couldn't see in myself, and hired me to work in her business as a funeral director. It was a meeting of minds. As we've discussed before, death, particularly in the Western community, is seen as something to be afraid of. It's shrouded in mystery. We avoid it. And my boss and I at our business have a saying: talking about death doesn't make you die any more than talking about sex gets you pregnant. It's something that will happen to all of us. The sooner we embrace it and lean into it and understand what it means for us and to it, and how we honor that person, is such an important step towards healing. It's not something that we expect anyone to get over. The loss of a parent, no matter how sick they are, how old they are, what the relationship is that we've had with them, nothing prepares you for that. I remember when my father died, we'd had a very fractured relationship. I was here, he was back in the UK. And I made what felt like a conscious decision, but it turned out to be a subconscious decision. I didn't want to speak to anybody who hadn't lost a parent already. I didn't want to hear from people, it's going to be okay, that didn't know it was going to be okay. Now I get to literally hold the hands of my families. I don't call them clients, they're my families, through one of the worst times of their lives. And death can be due to anything. It can be due to old age, it can be sickness, it can be suicide, it can be accidents. We've seen a huge increase in suicide, male suicide, predominantly over the last couple of years of the pandemic, because we know men don't talk to each other. And when they make the decision to end their lives, it's not a cry for help. It's a decision that they very rarely come back from. Women choose far more gentler means of ending their lives, and it is seen more as a cry for help. We take a lot of pride in how we tailor our farewells so that it's authentic. As the aging population leaves us, those that are left behind to take care of their farewells have very different ideas about what that should look like and what it should include. Oftentimes when the phone rings at work, people will ring up and say, how much is a funeral? They don't care how much a funeral is. They don't know how to start the conversation because it's something that hasn't been discussed. So my role as a funeral director and a funeral arranger is to listen, is to get ask as many questions and listen to what they say about what's important to them about that day, what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it smells like. You know, did mum have a certain scent that she loved or she hated? You know, did she have songs that she loved listening to? People at our age have very limited experiences of funerals. Oftentimes they are bound in funerals they've been to or what they've seen on the TV. They don't know what they can and can't have. And I say to my families, there's only two things you need for a funeral: a body and somewhere to dispose of it. Everything else is gravy. You know, and for those of you who have been married or have had children, it's a very similar event with a far shorter lead up. And you're told, oh, for the wedding, you've got to have this, you've got to have that. For the baby, you've got to have this, you've got. And it's only when it's over you think, I actually didn't need that. I didn't need that. I didn't need that either. All I wanted, and you don't remember so much of it because of all the people that are there, and you leave the event almost with a bit of an anticlimax. It's been such a build up to it, and then afterwards you don't remember who was there, you don't remember who you said hello to, who you kissed, who you hugged, and it's over. And at a time when people feel that they've lost control over what's happening because you don't have control, my primary job is to educate people and let them know that they do have control over the memories that they make surrounding the choices that they're given when they're making the choices for that final farewell. It's a job I take a huge amount of pride in. One of the best compliments I ever had was a woman whose husband had died quite suddenly. They'd just been on the trip of a lifetime. He was 65, still had a lot of living to do. And when she stood up, I went to her home to deliver his death certificate. And she said to me, Maureen, I didn't know you were going to be there that day, because funerals that I've been to in the past, they're not normally the people that you've spoken to. But when I stood at the lectern and I looked up and saw you there, I felt the same way as I did when the obstetrician came in when I was having my babies. I knew everything was going to be all right. And that was the biggest compliment I've ever had. Last week, I worked with her again. Her mother had died, and she said it made her life so much easier to be working with a friend to help her say goodbye. She said, I loved every minute of my mum's funeral. And there's no bigger compliment for me than knowing that my job has made someone's journey into grief that little bit softer. So that's what I do.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Same question to you, Jackie.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. That was beautiful. I'm always, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, oh. Thank you, Maureen and Georgie. They're just gorgeous. My journey into this sort of work. So my sister was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor when we were kids, and then she lived until she was about 41 years old. She died in 2015, and so I was thinking about death like my whole life, pretty much. And by the time my sister died, I'd already started to write a book to say goodbye to her, because not so much because I knew she was going to die, but more because I knew I had to make a life that didn't necessarily include her anymore, because she was her disabilities were getting progressively worse, and it got to a point where I knew I wasn't going to move back to Queensland and take care of her like I sort of thought I would at some point. But it got to a point where I probably couldn't have, and also, you know, I married and had a baby, and so I knew our paths were diverging and I wasn't going to be that for her anymore. So I started writing a book, and then she died about halfway through writing the book, so I took a bit of a break and trained as an interfaith minister and a funeral director and celebrant in that break, because you know what breaks are like when you're this when you're a woman, basically, and also when you're a woman at a certain point in life. Like, I just didn't have any time to waste. It was like, I'm going to do all the things all at once that I want to do, because life is short. And I think for me, that realization about mortality, obviously I'd been thinking about death for a long time because of my sister, but it was when I was pregnant with my daughter that my own mortality really came home to me. And so, yeah, so I think that's why once she was born, I enrolled in a creative writing PhD when she was still a baby, because I was like, I've got to write this book. And then when my sister died, the space that had been for her was open. So I could, you know what I mean? Like energetically, I had some space that wasn't hung up in grieving my sister and thinking about my sister and caring for her. And so that space could now be for caring about others. And so for me, it was about working out what my service could be. And it was pretty obvious to me that it would be funeral work, because we gave her a pretty good funeral. But the funeral directors we work with were nothing like Maureen, unfortunately. They were, the standard industry type, big business type ones, which we didn't know at the time, because you don't know until you start organising funerals for people. And I was just outraged. So I guess my move into death work was fueled by a very underestimated emotion, I think, for women, which was rage. I was just outraged. And I used that anger to fuel me and the studies that I then did. I mean, not just anger, obviously other feelings too, like the good ones as well. But so I did a Master's of Theology in Interfaith Studies through a seminary in the States, which is basically about being of pastoral and spiritual service to people outside of religion. So I'm not religious, but I do and always have sought a spiritual dimension to life outside of institutions, and outside of sort of specific dogmas and creeds. And then I started the funeral work as a volunteer for Tender Funerals, which you might have seen the Australian Story doco about. They're a not-for-profit funeral home down here where I live in Wollongong. And they do beautiful work. And then from there, I started working as an independent funeral director with the Pickaluna Funerals Network, which is, I think Jackie, the other Jackie in this group, Jackie Cohen, recommended me to Faith because we both work in that network. And so I don't know why she didn't just she didn't recommend herself, because we all have imposter syndrome, I guess. So she got me to talk today. Anyway, so that's how I got into death work. And I did the training that you mentioned, Gigi, with Zenith a number of years ago, which was transformative. I highly recommend it for anyone thinking about death, not necessarily to work in that space, but just because death is coming. For you and for other people, and not in a grim, macabre way, just in a real, it's coming for everybody kind of way. So in terms of talking about death and preparing for death, I find that, we're a very multicultural society in Australia, and my own background is Singapore Chinese and white Australian, kind of Eurasian. And I know in the Chinese culture, it's considered it's very superstitious about talking about death, to the point where a lot of, our grandfathers, my husband's grandfather, didn't leave a will, which caused all sorts of strife in families afterwards. So I find it's important to ease people into those conversations. And Juju might have some advice here too, but just thinking about ways to create a protected space to have the conversation. So something that I learned from another death walker when I was doing that training with Zenith was, if you're about to, well, actually, I do this before and after a funeral as well. I ask my noble ancestors to protect me from whatever the sticky energy that might be present at a funeral, or with a person who wants to make sure that their funeral goes really well and they hang around a bit too long. So I just ask my noble ancestors to protect me, and I do a bit of smoke, saging, cleansing, some sound cleansing, sometimes with one of those Tibetan singing bowls. And I find it's not so much I don't know if it's a superstition. Like, I frankly don't know. It's all a mystery. But death is one of those times when people enter that more mythical space. So if offering that kind of suggestion can help them get into that space, then I would do it. And some people are quite prone to, some people are very suggestible, you know, some people, and it's not suggestible in a bad way, but their energy is such that if you start talking about death and illness and stuff, you know, there might be a possibility that they might manifest some of that in their lives. So I think it is important to say, like, if you're that kind of person energetically, let's just do this. Let's just ask. You can just do it in your head, or ask whoever it is that you think can help you. It could just be your own self, but to set the intention that this is about information and sharing and preparation, and it's not about bringing that into your life just yet. Yeah, that'll do from me.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I'm going to minimize any interjection. Usually I will, but I'm not, because there's so much good stuff, and I want to make sure we just keep the focus on the speakers. So we're going to leave question 2. We're going to go to question 3 because of timing, and that is, in your opinion / experience, why do we fear dying? So let's go back to you, Shuji.
Thank you. I was preparing for answer for question 2, but I think it's all connected anyway. So from what I have witnessed, sometimes it's about control and losing control and lack of understanding of the unknown. And sometimes it's about a redefinition of a whole life pattern. I recently was with someone whose father died. He was nearly 60, and it was his first experience of death with his 89-year-old father dying. He was terrified, absolutely terrified. And his wife said he misbehaved and he was just acting out. But he had no resources, but he didn't have a definition of himself outside of that structure and what his place as a man in his family and his community was outside of that. So it was about, those kind of things. The power structures we live in can be so challenged by the notion of this transition into another phase, when that apex changes. So you no longer have the shape of your life as it was before. So a key question about, in what are we rooted, in what is life rooted, and what dimension do we exist? How are we connected to others? How are we connected to the earth? How are we connected to spirit? I did want to say one thing about one of my experiences. I've only just realised that one of my experiences of working with death and conversations around death happens to be in my work at the National Gallery of Australia as an educator. So nominally I'm there working with school groups as we walk around the gallery looking at the art. But inevitably, because so many artists, and particularly the First Nations artists, are talking about this integration of everyday life, identity, culture, land, spirit, ancestors. What I often find myself doing is putting out an offering to even the youngest of children, and saying, this is what is believed by this community. And that's why there's a hole for the spirit and the burial pole for the spirit to come out and look over the people who are still alive. And then I ask them what their own cultural backgrounds are, to tease that out. So I guess it's a finding a discourse that's a counter to fear, because it's a fear of the paradigms in which we live, and which are supposedly the things that keep ourselves and our family units and our culture together. That is a really critical thing. And the conversations around it, and actually just finding in whatever moment I'm in, whether it's in a gallery situation or with families or with patients or clients, and I agree, I'd rather call them family as well. What's the conversation? What is needed here? Are we in a state of fear, or is it about increasing understanding, increasing knowledge, increasing a sense of what is this body we are living in? What is precious to us? What are our values? Where have we come from? Where are we going to? That's probably how I'll answer that at the moment.
Yes, thank you, Shuji. Okay, Maureen.
You're going to have to repeat the question. I got lost in what you were saying.
No problem. In your opinion or experience, why do we fear dying?
We fear dying, and it's going to sound really trite. It's because we don't have experience of it, and what we don't know, we fear. What we and our feelings are often heavily influenced by what we see on TV. You know, we've all seen people, you know, have a heart attack on TV, and it's anyone that's seen someone have a heart attack knows it doesn't look like that. You know, when my family's asked to have a viewing, and you know they're crying, oh, I don't want to see, I need whatever they've envisaged is so far from what a dead person looks like. You know, unless there's been, you know, a traumatic death where there's visible trauma. I always say to people, you're welcome to come and have a look. Hold their hand. I'll let them know they'll be cold. There might be, you know, a little bit of moisture because of, you know, condensation, but removing that that fear, that and it's a fear of the unknown. Once they begin to open themselves up to what death is, that it's not scary. It's, yes, it's sad. There's no getting away from that. But I cannot tell you the amount of viewings that we've had that have started off as people almost, you know, clawing the carpet. They don't want to walk in and see their loved one, to us saying, look, you know, you got to go now. They've opened the coffin, they've sat with them, they've talked, they've chatted, at our new funeral home, we have a beautiful space for people to sit with their loved one, where the coffin or casket can be open or closed. And then they can go into what we proudly call our gin palace. They can help themselves to a wine or a gin or a tea or whatever they want, and sit down and tell stories and listen to music. And it normalizes everything. When we've had farewells at venues that allow that aren't crematoria or churches, that allow a coffin on site, it makes a very powerful statement. And people can be a little bit confronted sometimes walking into a surf club and seeing a coffin there. But by the end of it, people are resting drinks on the coffin, they're chatting, they're, you know, and it is a celebration. It's denied to so many people because they don't know they can have it. So as much as I think of myself as a death walker, educating people about dying and that it's nothing to be afraid of makes it so much more a joyful experience. Nothing brings me more joy than when people walk into our funeral home in tears and walk out laughing because they've had such a good time organizing a farewell. And they're not afraid anymore.
Beautiful.
So is it?
That's okay. It's you, Jackie. Yes.
Oh, yeah. So, and we're talking about fear of dying. I feel like we've.
Yeah. In your opinion, why do we
on to
fear dying?
Well, in my opinion, like most of the people I work with are not afraid of dying so much as they're afraid of, well, sorry, they're not afraid of death, but they're afraid of dying, like the pain or the discomfort or the, for a lot of people, it's the indignity that might precede death. I mean, I'm talking about people who, as opposed to funeral families that I work with for the funerals, they're not so much like, I mean, I think Maureen totally covered that. 100% is the fear of the unknown. And so doing all the things that Maureen said are fantastic. I always tell people the person's going to be cold, you know, be prepared for that sort of thing. And say, you know, you can talk to them, you can wash them, you can do whatever you want. Just they're still your person and you're still in relationship with that person, even if they've died. And you'll continue to be in relationship with that person after they've died for years. And there's research, like I'm still in relationship with my sister and always will be, even though she's not around to talk to. That relationship changes over time, just like it does when they're alive. So I think giving people the long view kind of helps as well. But anyway, but Maureen basically covered all that. So I'll talk about a bit about before people die. Yeah, they're scared of the indignity of like, will, you know, this is obviously a safe space, so I'll just go there. They worry about if they're going to smell, or in those last few days or weeks of their life, like, are they going to smell then? You know, are they going to not be able to control their bodily functions? This is a big deal for people who've lived a life and have been able to take care of themselves. I mean, it'd be a big deal for me too, I'm sure, when I get to that point. It was certainly a big deal for my mother-in-law when I was talking to her about the kind of death process that she was hoping for. That was the first thing that she said, was that I don't want to be smelly, I want to be clean. The whole way through, I was like, okay, that's important to you. So I got one of those oil diffusers, and popped that in her hospice room. So there was always a nice smell, no matter what. And I promised her that we'd keep her clean, and we just did. You know, we just did, because that was so important to her. So I think people are scared of that process, and talking about it whilst people are still responsive is a good idea. And so there are a couple, I think Zenith has a resource, actually, Zenith Arago, on her website for the kinds of things to talk about for a death plan, just like you might for a birth plan. I've got a pamphlet on my website, which is just like the kinds of questions to ask somebody about how they want to be treated when they're no longer conscious. And it is stuff like, do you want to be touched? Do you want the window open? Do you want people talking to you? Do you want some silence? You know, do you want an oil dispenser thingy? Like, because I know for me, I would want to be touched, but not all the time. I'd want to have some music, but not all the time, because I am an introvert, and people die the way they lived, you know, generally speaking. So taking all of that into account, rather than treating them like a patient or someone who no longer has any wants or needs or preferences. So I think once you start to talk about the death process, that does give people a little bit of control and agency back to them. And they say, oh, well, I didn't know I was allowed to really even control that process. I thought basically people are so used to handing over to doctors and nurses in that setting. So you say, well, actually, yeah, you can. And these are the things you can control. And obviously there's advanced healthcare directives that people can fill in as well, which is more about the medical treatment and the do not resuscitate type of stuff. But I think these questions are also really settling, because they remind the person that it's their body right up to the end.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. Just the idea about talking about death and not being, you know, my mother is an example of someone who's not afraid of her death, and she's talked to us about it for years, and I was sharing with them, so the speakers before, you know, when I was in London in July, my mother and I planned her funeral, and we've planned everything to the last detail. And it was so lovely sitting there talking to her with my other members of my family. It's interesting, the brothers couldn't cope with the conversation, but so it was only the girls that could sit together. And in that conversation, I had to be the one to hold it together, but I could just feel myself choking up in the intensity and beauty of that experience of just sitting with her and knowing exactly what she wanted. So we've got the list of everything, all her songs, what she wants to wear, everything, and it feels so empowering that she actually has complete control of that process. So I'm so blessed that that's who she is. Yeah, it's beautiful. So because of timing, again, this will probably be our last question unless we suddenly have time. So I'm going to stick with number 4 as our last one, because I really want some help from you, you beautiful women. So how can we as women in midlife prepare for the death of our loved ones? Because for me, I'm so clear that my mother's going soon. She's told us she's ready to go anytime. And I'm really clear that any minute I can get that call and I'll be on that plane. So I feel emotionally prepared, but I understand that being emotionally prepared is not going to be the same as when it happens. So how can we prepare for this? So we go Juji.
Okay. This is a big one, isn't it? The way I can best answer that question in this moment is to understand what are our resources, what is our integrity, what do we believe to be true and to be real, and to be in practice, to develop practices that help us anchor and center in that soul space, which is also an embodied space. So to understand what of us has bigger and what we connect to and what our life experiences are. And, you know, nature will be constantly knocking on our shell, on our carapace and saying, learn this from me, learn this from others. I have had experiences which other people don't have. When my mother died, I death walked with her for 40 days and I didn't know what was happening apart from sort of this sense of preoccupation and being in a channel of a road. And then at the end of about 38 days, I sort of realized, oh, this is Bardo. She's in Bardo. This is true. I've experienced it, but I've only known it as a concept before then in the Tibetan practices. And I thought, oh, this is true. Then someone said to me many years later, he said, oh, you could have had a choice about that. Not most people don't do that. You could have had a choice about that. So then learning that there's choice about how we prepare ourselves with death or how death affects us, knowing whether was that the optimal thing for me to do to accompany her through that. So there are so many, there's so much knowledge and information out there, and to be prepared to I would suggest anchor in our bodies, anchor in the breath, observe and be willing to receive the gifts of wisdom that land, that cultural practices, that spiritual practices have, and to know that we have choices and that the choices need to be true to us, whilst also respecting that for the person who's dying or who we might be accompanying or who we're working with, their choices are theirs and they might be quite fundamentally different. So it's sort of about developing tolerance around that as well. For me, that's a profoundly embodied practice. My practice is as an embodiment therapist, using breath work and sensory modalities, but also conceptually, there's things to figure out on that level too, and having the faith in your own integrity.
Beautiful. Thank you. Maureen?
Okay, can you hear me now? I agree with a lot of what Gigi said. Alluding to what I said previously as well about there being no way to prepare faith, I think what you've done with your mum is such a precious gift and very telling that it was the females that were able to come together and make those preparations while the males were like, da, 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 da. And that's fine. And that's one of the most important things is that, particularly when there's multiple family members, no one has a monopoly on grief. No one is doing it better or worse than someone else. I lost my grandmother in, she was my last remaining grandparent in August. She was 102. And right up until the end, she was living on her own and she was ready to go. And my mom was in 2 minds of whether she should go from London to Trinidad to go and visit her, or should I go for the funeral? Mum, she won't know you're there at the funeral. Go now. Go now. And she went, she spent 2 months with it, spent 2 months arguing and fighting and loving and crying and being with her mum. So when she went and mum was back in the UK, it was fine. You know, she'd had those precious moments with her. It's not possible for everyone. Sometimes there might be that call that you get, this has happened, we weren't expecting it, and you have to deal with everything then. The biggest lesson that I learned when I lost my father was that no 1 hour is the same. You feel like your face is leaking 1 minute, you're talking to your siblings and you're laughing about shit that he used to do that, you know, drove you insane. He'd be chasing you around the house with a moth that he'd found, and, you know, and then you're crying again, and then you're laughing again. And there's guilt there, you know. Be prepared for all of that and just lean into it. Don't feel the need to be strong. So it's okay to collapse. This is a part of life that will rock you to your foundations. Surprisingly so, but and I've seen families implode over it, and that's very sad, but that's what happens sometimes. Now, I just think, expect the unexpected. You know, don't expect to be sad all the time. Don't expect to be crying all the time. There are times when you will take a lot of comfort and joy from the memories that you have. But anyone that's ever lost anything, be it a job, a pet, a friend, a person, it's not linear. You don't think, okay, well, I'm past this step now, you know, Sure as shit, you'll get yanked right back to, no, we're doing this all over again until you've learned your lesson. And we may spend the rest of our lives learning those lessons, but as long as we're open to it, we will heal. Won't be the same. As Jackie said, she still has a relationship with her sister. It's a different relationship. And there are times when you think, you know, I forget what they sounded like, I forget what they smelt like. And that's normal too. But you're building another relationship with that person, and nothing can take that away from you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let's go over to you, Jackie.
So how to prepare for impending death, ours and other people's, like the big questions on a Saturday morning. So I mean, just everything that Juji and Maureen said. I'd just add that there's this, I think it's in a Hawaiian tradition, which I used in my book. I just remember hearing it and thinking, this is what you need to do. There's like 4 or 5 things you need to say to people before they die, ideally before or after or at some point. But I would recommend saying it to people if they're still alive and you're thinking about the reality of death. Is just, and they're obvious things, but it's like you say, I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you, goodbye. Those 5 things. They basically cover it. Right? I love you, I forgive you, I'm sorry, because thank you and goodbye. And those are good for even people who've done you harm, I think. And that's the other thing I would say is be prepared to feel all the feelings, like Maureen was saying, but sort of give yourself permission to feel all the feelings, including relief and happiness and release. So those might be the feelings that accompany your death. Even if it's someone that you dearly love, you might still feel those things. Sometimes we feel relieved when a story has ended, even if it didn't end in a way that you wanted it to, but it's over. And that's just a human response. It's a storytelling instinct, really, to just you can put down, the person who's died can put down their burdens and be at peace, and so can you, unless you torture yourself with the fact that you're now feeling at peace. So there's that. And in addition to what Juji was saying too about nature and ceremony, I would add that there are there's sort of ritual and routine that you can build into your days now, like while your people are still alive. And they can be rituals, just very small ones, of thanksgiving or remembrance, or occasional laughter or whatever. It's just not something you have to do every day, but making sure that it's a Buddhist practice. There's a number of meditations that the Buddhists have of contemplating death, your own death and other people's deaths. Such a cheery religion, but it helps you prepare. And so by doing that, if you build that into once a week or whatever, you have a few moments where you actually take the time out. Like maybe you do sit, maybe there's a particular tree or a plant that you can look at, or a candle you can light and look at, but you take a few intentional moments to think about your person or your people or yourself and your own impending death, and give thanks. And I think that ritualization it's a very human, very ancient instinct, and it helps to like routinize it and build it into your regular life, but it also helps to prepare for the reality of the death. Like that's what rituals are. They're mythic rehearsals of re-narrating the past or imagining new futures, and that's what you'd be doing.
Thank you, Jackie. I just shared the Ho'oponopono
Thank you.
ritual in the thing so people know what it's called. So the ritual that Jackie was referring to is called Ho'oponopono, and I use it with a lot of clients around forgiveness and the grief work as well. It's really powerful. So I just shared it so you can look it up and you can find it on YouTube and lots of great information. Yeah, lots of great resources on that. So thank you so much. I just wondered, I mean, we're nearly time, but I wondered if we've got time for one question, which might take us a little bit over. If anyone has to leave, feel free. Is there anyone who feels like they've got a dying question they would like to pose? Just put your hand up and we'll just pick one person. No virtual hands? We're good? So there's so many good stuff in the chat. So I hope the speakers, please have a look in the chat because there's some really, really great stuff there. And, you know, Anne-Marie, I was really moved by yours, and your story is just beautiful, you know, and how you've transformed that. It's a real testament, you know, and I don't know if you want to just have a quick word.
Yeah, I'd love to, Faith. Thank you very much. And yeah, just to share, so my little daughter Lauren, you know, died very suddenly and unexpectedly, and it, you know, I was a, you know, a present mummy, you know, for her. I have shared before in a different forum that I had an issue with alcohol, and God gave me two great blessings. One, he gave me the blessing of sobriety for most of her life, for 8.5 years of her life, and he also, just to be able to have been her mummy, you know, it was just, I'm so grateful. And I had, on the day that she died, when I was with her, I had a spiritual experience, and that very strong feeling that God was saving her from future suffering. It just came to me in that moment, and she knew only love. She lit up everybody's life, and I have such gratitude that I got to be her mummy. And that's, I have a very, very strong spiritual connection to her. That's another gift God has given me in my sobriety, that I'm present. And yeah, I would just say cherish, tell your loved ones you love them every day. She knew she was loved, and take lots of photos and videos with yourself as well in them. Just capture those little everyday moments. Be kind and enjoy it. We never know what's around the corner, but God is good, because even in my moments, grief can be very overwhelming. But in those moments where I feel overwhelmed, I get like an earth angel. You know, I get somebody reach out to me. I might see another little girl. I have someone come and talk to me, or, you know, I get the little signs that I'm not alone and I don't have to travel this journey alone, and we don't have to. God, you know, they say God doesn't give you I'm with my faith with God, but whatever your spiritual, you know, identity is, and they say God doesn't give you something you can't handle. It's not true, but you don't have to handle it by yourself. We have plenty of people who will walk with us, and on, you know, my darkest days, I have moments of great joy, and on my joyous days, I have moments of darkness, and it passes. And I guess when I feel overwhelmed, I do surrender. It has been a great humbling experience. But I just want to thank you, Faith, and thank you, ladies. It's just been an absolute blessing to have heard, you know, you sharing today, and thank you. And, you know, we are all in God's grace, and everything will be okay. I don't think we have anything to fear. We'll be okay, and our loved ones will be okay. They have just one final thing I share, because my Lauren was actually by herself in the moment she died, and I felt very, very upset about that I wasn't there. And I remember somebody said to me, but she wasn't alone, you know, her guardian angel was with her, and, you know, Mary was with her. Like, so our the loved ones who have gone before will come, you know, and bring them on their journey and their transitions. So it's amazing when you go through it, you no longer have fear. I no longer have a fear of death, you know, and live this life as much as we can, and then we get the joyous reunion when we're done. So live their legacy would be the other thing. Live their legacy and enjoy your life, and that's a tribute, because they haven't necessarily got to live as long as we can. So sorry, it's probably gone on a bit. Thank you, Faith, for the opportunity to share.
Yeah, thank you. You know, like as a friend of yours too, I got to witness your journey, and it was just so moving to see your strength and the grace, you know, and the vulnerability, you know, that you allowed us to witness this. So I just really want to thank you for that. And I want to thank our three speakers. Thank you so much, Juji, Maureen, Jackie. It's such a profound conversation, and I'm just so glad we got to do this. I'm so glad this was our final one. What a wonderful way to end the year. And my takeaway is, I want to quote you, Maureen. So embracing the roller coaster of life, you know, and lean into it. And I love that. And I love what you said around sex. Who said the thing around sex? Someone else said that. Talking about sex isn't, yeah, love that. So, and I got so much from everyone. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Just again, what I want to do is so we can normalize these conversations and they're not such a big deal because we're all going to go through them. So thank you so much. And in our Silver Sirens virtual sanctuary, we do this membership that we have. We do have a segment called Elderhood and Legacy. And in that segment, we have lots of resources around dying well and preparing for it for ourselves and our loved ones. So thank you for being part of this conversation today. So Garisha is going to post, we're going to pick 2 names who's going to be the winners of our Silver Sirens merch. Our Silver Sirens merch is our Silver Sirens t-shirt and our notebook. So that's coming up now. And just a quick word about next year. So our Silver Sirens Virtual Sanctuary, our events calendar will begin in February. So we're working on it right now. So we're going to do February to June, and there will be a Thriving Through Midlife in that once a month, the 3rd Saturday of every month. And the next one is in February, and it'll be about money health. So we know that a lot of women tend to have a lot of problems around this stage of our life because of super, because of the fact that, you know, a lot of us stayed at home, etc. So we're going to have 3 experts talking to us about money health. And there's lots of other great things to look forward to as well. The Silver Sirens Redefining Aging event, which is our signature event. I'm going to be doing a launch the date on the 12th of December. So very, very early. We're going to be launching the date for next year so everyone can plan. I am also going to be doing a Perth trip in February. So any sirens in Perth, I'm going to be organising a lunch so we can all get together. So our community is continuously growing. When we have our events, we have women from all over the country attend our physical event, and we have women from all over the world attend the online because the event is hybrid. So I want to thank you for being here with me, joining me for this beautiful conversation. And I want to thank again Juji, Maureen and Jackie. Thank you so much for your contribution. I really, really appreciate it, really heartfelt. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. Yes, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Anne-Marie.